Well, good morning.
Hey, how are you today?
Well, it's great to have you here and to tell our audience that we're privileged today to have the Democratic nominee for Secretary of State, Heather French Henry, here. And since she wasn't able to get here at the proper time for the for an in-person interview, we're going to pre-record this and then run it again next week.
Excellent.
So, Heather, how's it been going? How has the campaign been going?
Everything has been going great. As you know, traveling across the state is no small feat. You're trying to get to as many counties as possible,
right.
Making sure that rural Kentucky feels like their voice is being heard during a campaign, not just the urban areas.
Right.
And really getting out to rural Kentucky, like where I'm from in Maysville and Augusta. We spent some time in eastern Kentucky, of course, and some of the most beautiful parts of the state, no doubt. Some of the hardest parts, certainly, to reach en masse.
Right.
And so trying to make sure that while we are campaigning and doing our due diligence, I still have a 16-year-old at home. So I'm still mom. I have an online business, and Stephen and I still have a lot of projects. We still have the Rosemary Clooney House in Augusta, Kentucky, and so we've got a couple of fall festivals coming up there, so hopefully we'll make it back home for turning of the leaves, which will be nice. So it takes a lot to get everything together for a campaign in our life, but the beauty of the campaign is we've really been traveling the state doing a lot of community projects for the last 20 years. So it hasn't been just during the campaign to ask for votes that we've been traveling the state. So it's nice to rekindle some friendships, but to see some familiar faces again.
I think that probably one of the things you've had to overcome in your campaign is the fact that all that many people know about you is that you were Miss America in 2000. Was that right? 2000?
Yeah, it is, and that it took me a half a decade, certainly, to win that title. So I'm very proud of that. But really, the work that I did as Miss America with our veterans and our military, those two things are brought up most often. But it has given me some special entree into some special parts of our festivals, being able to help out with some of the festival pageants as well.
It helped you choose your cause early, didn't it?
It did. You know, I'm the daughter of a Vietnam veteran from the Marine Corps. I know that the Vietnam War, of course, holds a very special place in their heart here in Bardstown, certainly with the Sons of Bardstown. But it's very important for me that, you know, Miss America was a wonderful title, but being the daughter of a veteran is really the most special title. That's one that has no term limits. It doesn't time out, certainly, at all. And so while Miss America is wonderful, the work that I did then and that I continue to do now long after that title will always be for our nation's heroes, our veterans.
Well, you really have been an advocate for veterans for almost 20 years here, haven't you?
Well, in an official capacity, about 2 decades. That is true. And trying to make sure that while we travel across the country, you know, we've been able to do some national health care screenings and seminars for veterans, but being able to come back home to the Commonwealth, bring some best practices. I started championing Veterans Treatment Courts, which is an alternative sentencing court, in 2008 when that first grew in Buffalo, New York, and then Rochester, and then it's grown across the country to over 300 of those. And here in Kentucky, we have nearly 5 that are up and running throughout our state. And so continue to champion those, but we saw best practices elsewhere and help to bring those back into the state, which is nice.
And this is in your position as a Commissioner of Veterans Affairs?
Some of it was, and some of it was just as an advocate. So from 2000 to 2014, I was a business owner / advocate for our veterans. But from 2014, I took on the position as Commissioner of the Kentucky Department of Veterans Affairs, and then under Bevan's administration stayed on as Deputy Commissioner. So for nearly 5 years in an official State Department position, being able to work with our 4 state veterans nursing homes, our 5 state veteran cemeteries, and 910 employees. So that's a pretty large job.
So tell us how you think that what you have been doing helps equip you to do the job of Secretary of State.
Well, certainly the Secretary of State is a very important position in the state. There are 3 fundamental aspects of the Secretary of State's office. You have in the chief election official, certainly to make sure you're helping to oversee and partner with those entities like our county clerks and our state board of elections to oversee elections and that process down to the community level. helping to get money at the state level and the federal level as well with the National
Right.
Association of Secretary of States. And then the business administration component of the Secretary of State's office, which actually is the largest component of the Secretary of
Right.
State's office, which means there's over 250,000 businesses and organizations that have filed with that office. If you start a business or organization,
That's
you must
amazing.
register there,
Yeah.
and then every year do your due diligence to make sure you
I
re-register.
didn't realize that.
Absolutely. And so it really is part of that one-stop shop portal to help businesses start, maintain, and grow. And so it partners with like workforce development, economic development, Department of Finance. And then you go on into some of the historic parts, which is the overall administration. And that also encompasses, as a DAR member, which I'm very proud of, I'm
Yes.
a member of the Captain Philip Buckner chapter from Augusta, Kentucky.
Yes.
And the Secretary of State's office oversees all the historic archives, which are the land grants that make up the Commonwealth. And there's also a whole host of other programs too, but those are the three main funnels for the Secretary of State's office. And so when you look at the administrative responsibilities, legislative responsibilities, and overseeing a budget, I was able to do all three of those for nearly 5 years in the Kentucky Department of Veterans Affairs. So our department, which is one of the largest under the executive branch, actually has a $102 million budget, over 900 employees, facilities all across the state, 120 counties worth of services, and people who cover all the veterans population. And so I was involved in the administrative responsibilities for all of that. Then also our executive staff at KDVA in Frankfurt. Also the legislative policy, which drives our department, and then also helping other legislators do veteran-specific policy as well that we didn't necessarily administer, but we helped to champion, like the Service Disabled Veteran-Owned Business Accreditation Program, which I sat on that board for a couple of years. And while that doesn't funnel through the Secretary of State's office, it is part of, Secretary of State is part of the awareness that pushes that out to businesses that may pertain to. And that's run through the Department of Finance. And then when you talk about budget, so again, our budget, $102 million. And we saw that grow from the time I was commissioner from about 96 to about $102 million when I had to step away to run the Secretary of State's office. And it's a pretty complex budget as well, because when you're dealing with healthcare facilities, which draw in state and federal money, especially the federal piece with Medicaid, you're looking at understanding what is a general fund and what is a restricted fund. And so being able to administer both of those reliably, dependably, and equitably throughout the department, how they're supposed to be distributed, is extremely important. So the Secretary of State's office also has, of course, administrative responsibilities, not as many staff, not as large of a budget, but no less important in the distribution of its resources as well. So when it comes to understanding and navigating state government, I'm certainly well experienced to do that.
No one has to take you by the hand and show you the ropes.
No, ma'am, that's right.
What is there anything that comes to mind right off the bat, or that you, when you think of the Secretary of State's office, things that you would like to change or institute to put your stamp on it, so to speak?
Well, first things first, when you get into the office, of course, you're headed into a budget session immediately. So you'll be inheriting the budget that the previous Secretary of State has put forth. So making sure you understand the nuances of that budget that really has been done by someone else.
Right.
And then looking and seeing if you need to augment that. So I assume if we're not able to get enough federal money to be able to change over all the machines for all the county clerks in their counties, then we may have to request some additional funds through the legislative process. All they can do is say no, but they can't say yes unless you request it, certainly.
Exactly.
And I don't know whether the current Secretary of State will be requesting additional funds through the state legislature.
Right.
So making sure that as soon as you take office or as soon as the election is over, getting access to that budget, understanding the depth and breadth of that so you know how to proceed once you're sworn in. Reconnecting with all 120 county clerks. There's a statewide county clerks meeting shortly after the election, so making sure that you're going there, talking to them. We as
finding out what they need.
Finding out what they need. They really are the boots on the ground
Yes,
in the
they
trenches
are.
for the elections, and I approach any leadership position as a servant leader, where I feel like I'm in a leadership position not to be able to boast that I've got this title and to dictate, but really to say, how can I better serve you in the position that I'm in? And I think with our county clerks, they need much more of that type of partnership from the state level, because the Secretary of State's office has always been and should continue to be the fiscal foot soldier for those local county clerks, and being able to help administer anything that they need at that local, because if something's going to happen during an election, it's going to happen there, and they need to know and be secure that they have your support as Secretary of State. We always worked well with them at KDVA because they handled our veteran license plate renewal fees, which funneled into the Veteran Program Trust Fund. And so what an office that has a large amount of responsibilities that most people don't know about, right? I mean, even just a few months ago, Steve and I were here in Bardstown getting some historical records from your county clerk's office. And not only do they have historical records, but many years ago, so if you're dealing with a veteran and trying to find their paper of separation or their DD-214 form, if they were Vietnam or older, many times when they came back home, they would register their DD-214 form with the county clerk's office. And so many times when older veterans have not been able to find their paperwork or their family members, we've encouraged them, not only do you have to call Military Records or St. Louis at the last resort, but you can also go to your local county clerk's office and they may have it. And so we have been able to expedite that, getting that paper separation by going to the county clerk's office. It doesn't always happen, but there are times where it has been. It gives you another avenue. It does give you another avenue, and many people don't know the county clerk's office houses those types of historic records.
It's amazing. We don't realize how much we depend upon it.
That's right.
The legislature recently reduced the powers of the Secretary of State. So what is your opinion on that? Do you think that those changes can maybe limit your ability to investigate irregularities by limiting your ability to get in and see the names of voters? Or
here's the way I look at changing environments. So having the experience of serving in one administration and staying on in another, two totally different administrations, two totally different parties, you learn how to meet your objective no matter what the environment. So you are constantly looking out for ways to achieve your objective in a very partnership driven way. That's how I always like to work. I always love to be a part of a team. There's an old proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I believe in state government, we have had too much aloneness and divisiveness. And so we have to learn to come together to go far. And elections is one of those processes. So while I understand there has been a division through the last legislative session that separates the State Board of Elections really out of the Secretary of State's office, removes that Secretary of State leadership from chair of the board to a non-voting ex officio member, there's still a way, regardless of whether I like the new structure, there is still, I believe, a way through attitude, through the development of partnerships, to be able to bring to the table in good faith the information that the State Board of Elections and their members are going to need from the Secretary of State's office. This shouldn't be a competition. This should be something that we all get around the table together.
It should be a nonpartisan issue.
That's exactly right, and that's the way I intend on leading the Secretary of State's office. So I'm actually excited to be able to get in there and see how we can effectively partner together in whatever atmosphere it's in. So making sure you're at the meetings, providing the information that the State Board of Election needs. I understand that the membership, which is 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, are pretty solidified right now. And so being able to come in and saying, hey, what do you need from me as Secretary of State? What can we do? Secretary of State also is one of the few, if not one of only 2, that has the Homeland Security access to be able to tell current cybersecurity threats. So that information is going to be still vital to the State Board of Elections and the county clerks to understand how to maintain the sensitive information that we have digitally.
Right. Well, mentioning cybersecurity, that is a big issue, and I hear it from everyone. The cybersecurity of the importance of keeping all the data, which we put into our machines every day, but having to do with the sanctity of the voting process. So give me your thoughts on that about...
Well, first off, everyone should know every government agency needs to have cybersecurity as their number one priority. It's not just the Secretary of State and the State Board of Elections, because every government agency is handling sensitive information. We at KDVA, we're handling veterans' health care and benefits information, which, I mean, you talk about HIPAA violations as well. I mean, you're making sure you're housing that sensitive information in the most secure manner. We were working with Department of Defense on DD-214 form access, and so they had to actually come in, DOD, to do a risk assessment on the COT, the Center of Technology, which takes care of all of the state digital infrastructure. And so making sure that we are staying on top of any sort of threats that are said to be out there, which is why that Homeland Security access is extremely important, so that we can get in real time what might be coming our way or what other states are getting hit with. You always have to be proactive while also still being reactive. Sometimes security threats are a little more reactive, but you always have to be on your toes, which is why I still think that whether it's through the Secretary of State's office or additional funding for the State Board of Elections, we need to get some funding for a cybersecurity information officer who solely, not in other duties as assigned, but who solely every single day is investigating that and looking over any sort of holes within our cybersecurity issues.
Well, I can certainly agree with that. The U.S. Senate is talking now about possibly passing a bill giving about $134 million, I think, to election security for the states. But there are critics who say that is not nearly enough, that would only stretch the service, that all of the voting systems need to be updated in every single state. What's your opinion on that?
I certainly feel it's probably not enough. It's something, which is good.
Yes.
And again, working in government, you realize that sometimes these processes take a while, and patience certainly is a virtue when it comes to working in government. That's where I think when working with our state legislatures, trying to figure out what the state can also do fiscally as well as the federal, and we're not exactly sure how that's going to break down as well. But no, I have a feeling it's not going to be enough to cover everyone's needs, but the states also need to take ownership over some of that responsibility.
Would you consider being an advocate for that, going to Washington and trying to...
Well, the National Association of Secretary of States, which houses both Democrats and Republican secretaries, that is part of their fundamental job, is to lobby and for policy and finances for those systems within each state. So I anticipate that I would be a very active member of the National Association of Secretary of States to do that.
Well, you've certainly had the experience in working both at the state and national level on things.
That's right. You know,
I think that gives you a certain amount of familiarity with the process.
Certainly, you know, as commissioner, and every state has a state department of Veterans Affairs, and you're also a part of a National Association of State Directors of Veterans Affairs. So some states call their directors or commissioners or secretaries, but that's our national title. And so we worked fundamentally with the executive director who pounded the pavement up in Washington, D.C. to take forth our agenda to work with the Secretary of Veterans Affairs and with our House and Senate leadership and the President to make sure that they were hearing our voices from the state, because that's a different system. And it's much like the election process, where the National Association of Secretary of States is there to be that voice for the states, because at the federal level you've got two different sets, right? You've got federally mandated issues, and then states also have their state and community mandated issues. So that's where that national association, in any sort of leadership, a national association is extremely important.
Absolutely. I know I've heard you talk a little bit about voter education in schools. Talk to us about that. Tell us about what you have in mind and what that would encompass. And is it more than just voter education? Is this like civics or?
Well, it's a little bit of both, right? So I know that there are civics teachers that are really excited that I bring the subject up, and I think that there have been a few of our Secretary of States in the past that have been a partner with some of those teachers. I know at KDVA I worked in part with teachers on our Kentucky Poppy Project to educate children grades K through 12 about World War I. And so we found a very creative way to teach them that history. And so I have a lot of experience in working through school systems on patriotic education. So I would love to be able to partner with our teachers in even a much more creative way. And you're going to have to look at them as almost three different pools, right? Grades K through 5, and then you go to middle, and then you go to high school. And what does that look like? You know, the education for voter engagement is just as vital in our grades K through 5. We've shown it through early childhood education. If you start younger, they carry it with them the rest of their life. It needs to be something that is consistent as they progress in their school years. And then when we talk about voter education, you know, my daughter, and I mentioned this the last time we were on, no one had talked to her about her eligibility to vote. And she was a graduating senior at 17 from Manual High School. She was going to be 18 before the general election. It wasn't until we as a family engaged in that conversation that she became aware that she was eligible to vote. And so she literally, 5 minutes after I filed for office, she registered at the Secretary of State's office. And it was so funny because she was really a little bit nervous, certainly, but it really concerned me that no one in her school had talked to her about that. And I do know that we've got some programs that are starting to be implemented at JCPS in Louisville, and that there are some statewide that need to be augmented or enforced that would help get that word out. But regardless of the side of the aisle that you're on, Republican, Democrat, Independent, we need to be encouraging these young people that they need to step up to the plate if they're eligible.
You know, I think sometimes schools get a little skittish about that. They're afraid that they're being, quote, political.
Right, and I do feel like there needs to be a process to be fair and impartial, certainly.
But I know when I was in school, civics was a very important part of our education, and I'm just not sure that it's that much of a part of the children's education now.
Well, you know what's really exciting is that our Lieutenant Governor candidate, Jacqueline Coleman, is a civics teacher.
I know.
So it would be really great to be able to have her as a partner to help this initiative statewide.
For a lot of different reasons.
Yes.
Tell us about how's the campaign going? I know that this is, you have a family and you have all of these other ventures and things that you're working on. How is that working out?
You know, it's interesting. One day, many years from now, when I have long retired from public life, I will probably write a very interesting book that not only details, I think, what I've been through in public life, but also my husband. Campaigning is great. You get to meet and greet a lot of wonderful people. Mm-hmm. Campaigning as a mother of school-age children, just to be quite honest, has been a bit more of a challenge than I thought it would be. You know, you're gone almost every single night. My eldest daughter, graduated from high school during the primary, so we had graduation to deal with. We moved her into college in the general election, so we were navigating all of that. And then Taylor, being 16 and a junior, you know, they can't be on the road with me nearly as enough. When Stephen ran many years ago, they were 4 and 6. They don't really remember when you're not there so much. You have a babysitter. But now in their teenage years, these are their formative years. And so if you're not there for prom or homecoming or going to get the dress or getting the class ring, those are really mile markers for children and teenagers their age. And so I have to be able to, as a mom, protect the sanctity of those moments. And campaigns, it can be hard to do that. but I'm a pretty strong-willed woman, so we make sure that that we do that, certainly. But with our other projects, we have continued to be able to rely on volunteers, like at the Rosemary Clooney Museum in Augusta, Kentucky. We do have a great, huge conservation project in Louisville, about 6,000 acres, one of which includes the old Bardstown Louisville Turnpike, which is what we were doing up here at the county clerk's office, looking at some of those historic documents.
Okay.
So life goes on, regardless of
Yeah.
whether you're in a campaign or not. And so you're not only campaigning full-time, but you're in life full-time, and you just make it work. I think as women, we just naturally just try to make it work. Sometimes it's not so graceful, but you just keep strong and just keep moving forward.
Well, I had a friend to tell me once that said, and it was a male, and he said, there's a difference between how men and women approach things. I said, yeah? How's that? And he said, well, when women see things that need to be done, they get up and do it, but when men see it, they wait for somebody to tell them to do it. I said, yeah, that sounds
Well, we do
about
know
right.
the benefit of women coming together, which is why I love being a part of the Daughters of the American Revolution. I just made it past my provisional year for the Derby Phillies, which helps support the Derby Festival.
Yeah.
And I'm a part of the Women's Club of Louisville, which in its origination, Susan
Right.
Avery, 129 years ago, she was part of the original suffrage movement, which we will be celebrating the 100th anniversary of women's right to vote in 2020.
I know that.
Yes, so that's going to be a huge issue going into next year.
It is.
Yes.
It is. And there's just so much you can say about it. And
There is, and again, you talk about going into schools and working. I mean, what would it be like to get all of the women's clubs around Kentucky together to be able to be a part of that? Partnering with all the DAR
Yeah.
chapters to be a part of that. I mean, strong women in leadership make a big difference. We've always known it, right? And now it's really time to highlight it in
Well, we
2020.
keep saying it's the year of the woman, but I haven't. When they pass the Equal Rights Amendment, that's when we'll know it really has arrived.
Right.
I'm still working on that. Well, Heather, I know you're talking to people in every county in this state about things. Can you tell us what they're talking about? What are they saying to you? Maybe not necessarily about the Secretary of State's office, but about things in general. What's on their mind? What are they worried about? What are they concerned about?
You know that you and I are the less than 1% that wake up every morning thinking about government. 99% of the population does not get up thinking about campaigns, government. They're getting up thinking about getting their family ready, feeding them, getting to school, getting to work, when their next family vacation is, when's their next pay raise, or what they're going to do with their job. Farmers are out there right now talking about drought. We're in a huge drought right now. I mean, you look at when we were coming here today, you look at the cornfields, and we just talked to a farmer this morning on one of our lands, and he said he's only going to get about 60% of his crop.
And now we have to worry about fires.
And fires as well.
Just had a big one here in Nelson County.
So real people are talking about real things to do with life. Not that campaigns aren't real, but real people are talking about real things in life. They're talking about pensions, certainly. A lot of information out there going around about teachers' pensions, state workers' pensions, talking about that,
So the
certainly.
concerns of those.
Concerns about that, concerns about the stock market, seeing some volatility in that, concerns about national security. I do think the national news on both sides of the spectrum makes people a little worried about any sort of future war or conflict coming up. And we're a very military and veteran-friendly state, so all of us are only 1 degree of separation from military.
800,000 veterans in the state of Kentucky.
Well, 300,000 veterans.
300,000,
Yes,
all
in the
right.
state. It's 8%.
I'm only off by 5.
Yeah, that's right. That's all right. It feels like, right? We have such warriors. But also when you go out in local communities, they're talking about local tax issues, certainly trying to create revenue stream. I know in Augusta, Kentucky, tourism, I mean, that's a town of only 1,400, but that's rural Kentucky, and that's real Kentucky, right?
Right.
And so trying to make sure that economic development issues are just as important there as they are in Louisville, Kentucky, which is obviously much larger. but tourism is what drives a lot of dollars in Augusta. And also we have an industry, Berry Industries, which just downsized a little bit, and we really have to fight to keep those industries in those small towns. That can make a town go under, and so we want to make sure we stay on top of all of our industry here for the jobs of Kentucky.
Well, I had just recently read an article in talking about the state of Kentucky, and there was a group that did an analysis, and it was in the Kentucky Gazette, which is a great paper. But it talked about the fact that in the Golden Triangle of Kentucky, which is from Lexington to Louisville to Kenton County in the north, that within that Golden Triangle, that it's a different Kentucky than on Eastern Kentucky,
in the rest of the state,
and Southern Kentucky. So one size does not fit all. There are things that we need in one part of the state that we do not need in another part of the state.
Well, it's true when you reach out even to veterans, when you do veterans healthcare seminars in Eastern Kentucky versus veterans in Western Kentucky, you do approach it quite differently, because both sets of populations like to receive information and access in different ways, certainly. And so when you go into Eastern Kentucky, if you're a government agency, that may not be the right approach to come in as a government agency, but to partner with a community-based organization to do that, something that they know, that they see every day in their community, versus Western Kentucky, which is very used to government agencies, because it's a growing population sort of over there. But when we talk about the county clerks and you talk about any sort of election reform, I always remind people that we can't create mandates for all of these counties. They have to be in partnership, because what a county clerk goes through in Bracken County may not be what a county clerk goes through in Warren County, certainly, or in Nelson County. Making sure that we're looking at the different populations and different needs and dynamics of those counties.
Level the playing field for all of them. Well, Heather, one of the last things that we always do at the end of the interview is to ask you to tell the people why people should vote for you rather than your opponent. What are the unique strengths that you bring, and that will make you a better Secretary of State?
Well, I certainly would be humbled to have everyone's vote, for the very reason that I have a lot of experience working in government, both the local, the state, and the national level. After 5 years of leading a very large department throughout the state, I understand fundamentally the responsibilities it takes to administer staff, to work in our legislative policy, to work both sides of the aisle in a nonpartisan way, and to also handle a very large budget that makes the taxpayers proud of what we've done. And I want to make sure that when we go into Secretary of State, that we're doing that same due diligence to the utmost. And so I bring that with me. I also bring with me the passion of being a servant leader, which means that you're there to serve the community, not the other way around. So I would humbly ask for everyone's vote on November 5th.
Well, thank you so much for coming in to see us.
Thank you.
Really appreciate the interview.
It's so nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too.